Where is your mission field? You know, if you are a believer and a discipler and a follower of Jesus Christ, then you have been given a mission field. It may not be in a different country, and it may not be across the world. It may be right near your house or in your city or community, but you have been sent to the world because the Spirit of Christ is a sent spirit. And so I'm talking with Jean and Greg Hines today. We're going to go over their story and what they're doing in Honduras. But I want us all to just think about what our mission field is as we are inspired by all the amazing things that Greg and Jean are doing in Honduras. Think about where God has called you. And as usual, go into the description there and click on the link for the free ebook and download that so you can read that and be inspired, and also like and follow definitely and subscribe to this podcast so you can get more great content that's coming up. All right. God bless. All right. Well, welcome. We have with us today Greg and Jean Hines, and we are actually recording this in Honduras. So, hey guys, how are you doing?
We're doing great.
Doing good.
Yeah, doing well. So, for those of you who don't know, I am currently, when I'm recording this, in the country of Honduras, and we have been here for a few days. We're all hitting the wall of activity and relationship and emotions and all of the stuff that we've been doing over the past few days. And I wanted to just kind of get some of Greg and Jean's story down for everybody, as we've been getting some stories of some different pastors, and I just kind of wanted to get in some of this. But what town are we in right now, guys?
We are in La Campa in the state of Lempira.
Lempira. Right? And what's the people group here?
The people group is the
Lenca people. And so you guys are here in Honduras. You've been here for how many years?
8 years full time.
8 years full time. And we'll get into kind of how you guys got here. But let's start way back at the beginning. I don't want that to sound like it's really far back. But let's start way back at the beginning to just kind of your personal testimonies, and I'll kind of start with you, Jean. Just kind of tell everybody kind of how you came to really faith and repentance and following Jesus.
First of all, I think I had a salvation experience when I was 10 years old, and as I have learned over all the years now, that was the extent of it. It was a salvation experience. Mm-hmm. I was baptized, but I was never discipled. I was never trained properly what it meant to be a follower of Christ. And I just went about my life just as anybody would at the time. So many years later, one Sunday morning, I was at home and started watching TV, and was flipping through the channels, and I heard a pastor speaking, and just listened to a couple of words here and there, and decided I'll see what else is on. And something kept leading me back to listen to that pastor, and now I know that something was the Holy Spirit. Mm-hmm. And the pastor that was delivering the sermon that morning was Charles Stanley with First Baptist Atlanta. And I truly believe for the first time, a real solid message about God's love for us. Mm-hmm. And I rededicated my life to Christ that day.
And were you dating this tall guy already, or what point was that in your relationship?
We had not yet started dating.
Okay. So that was even before you started dating?
Yes.
So yeah, you really kept this a secret, because
yes,
from what I know is, so you kept watching Charles Stanley every Sunday morning.
Yes, I continued watching every Sunday morning that I was available. There had to be some specific reason as to why I could not watch or listen to his messages, and that would be the only time I would miss his sermons.
Yeah, this was in the Atlanta area, right? Because
I was living in Dunwoody.
Yeah, you were living not far from First Baptist Atlanta
right.
at the time. And so then you meet this guy, and you guys start dating, and you get engaged, and there's the whole process. But Greg, you weren't following the Lord at that point, right?
No, I was not. I did not grow up in anything remotely resembling a Christian home. So my parents taught me and my sister values and morals and ethics, and they taught us to work hard and be responsible and all kinds of good things that are really important to know and have to be successful in life. But none of it had any Christian foundation or any Christian foundation or basis at all. Mm-hmm. So I did well in some things. I worked hard, I studied, and I did a lot of the things I was supposed to do. But I also did a lot of things that I really would have been better off not doing, a lot of parties and things. Basically, where I grew up, you worked hard and you played hard. Mm-hmm. That was the example that I had from my family and my friends' families. So that's what I did. I worked hard and I played hard.
Yeah. And you met this lovely lady.
Yes, we met. We worked together. I was acquired in a merger, we'll say. The company that she worked for, based out of Atlanta, bought the company that I worked for, based out of Chicago. And eventually,
so you were in Chicago?
Yeah, that's where I grew up.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So eventually I was relocated to Atlanta, and that's where we really started getting to know one another, and we got engaged, and then we got married, and then I got what I could call, to that point, one of the surprises of my life, when not long after we got married, all of a sudden one Sunday morning, she's watching Charles Stanley on TV. And I thought, this is not what I signed up for. This can't be a good thing. I was not really impressed at all at this development. I do recall seeing him on TV as a child, and now
when you're trying to find cartoons,
exactly.
Flip right past
yeah. Back when there was only like 3 or 4 channels. Yeah. And went right
this
by
is Bugs Bunny
until I found Bugs Bunny. So in any event, I was very surprised, needless to say. My new bride is watching Charles Stanley on TV, and this, as I think I mentioned, it was not what I signed up for. To her credit, she didn't harangue me and try to make me watch or listen, and she just kind of let me do my thing. I found excuses not to be there, not to pay attention, or whatever the case was. But little by little, I started hearing more of what Charles Stanley was preaching, and over a period of time, I came to realize that middle ground that I had sort of carved out, where I kind of thought, well, I've heard the name of Jesus before, so somehow in the end it'll be okay. I've heard of Jesus. Yeah, he went to the cross for something, and I'll do some good deeds. I'll throw some food in the food bin at Thanksgiving, and somehow it'll all work out. Because of the preaching and teaching of Charles Stanley, and the fact that my wife was listening to him consistently, I heard the truth, and I reached a point where I said, okay, I got to make a choice. I'm either going to accept what this man is saying about Jesus and salvation and the cross and all of that, and I'm going to follow him, or I'm just going to keep on going and doing whatever it is I want to do. And fortunately, the Holy Spirit drew me in the right direction to where I received Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior.
Awesome. And then, but you guys just kind of kept doing Sunday morning at home, right, on TV for a while?
We did, and probably for several months, we just continued to listen to his sermons on TV. And then one weekend, we realized, we could be actually attending church since we live right here in Atlanta and the church is located here. So
it's kind of crazy. We're like 20 minutes away, and we're sitting there watching it on TV, and we're making notes. I mean, we're doing all this stuff. It's like, well, why don't we go down there and see what's happening?
And so we started attending church.
Yeah, and you got involved over time.
So I moved my letter to FBA, and Greg was saved, and he joined FBA and was baptized.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. And so that kind of continued. You guys got involved in different things, right? Sunday school and all this. And then eventually you got on staff, right, Greg? Like you were on staff in some sort of position?
Yeah, I did. For about the last 4 years we were members there for about 11 years. So about the last 4 years, I was in the facilities department and director of facilities for most of that time.
Yeah. And so when you first came to Christ, when you first got baptized, did you think, man, so the plan is in about 10, 15 years, we're going to go to Honduras and live there, right? That was exactly
it. That was
right?
exactly the plan. It went exactly the way it was supposed to.
So what was sort of that transition? What was sort of that process of getting saved, getting involved, even being on staff to kind of moving into being here full time in Honduras?
Well, as we joined a Sunday school class and received very good teaching and very foundational and very helpful to our lives, and very missions-minded class, and FBA is very missions-minded, and just through getting involved in serving in hospitality, then we got involved in missions, some local missions, and FBA had an annual missions conference where they hosted the Faith Promise missionaries, and we actually hosted a missionary at our home 1 year, and we just, one step after another, we just kept getting more involved and more involved in missions.
Yeah, so we decided that we were going to host a missionary in our house, and so I'm thinking, man, this is going to be...
Man, you're really committed in the Baptist church when you host a missionary.
Yeah. I mean, we were excited, and I was thinking, man, this is going to be awesome. I want to get some missionary. He's been in the African bush for the last 5, 10, 20 years, doing missionary stuff, and he's going to come to the house. He's going to have all these awesome stories to tell, and this is going to be great. So we go to First Baptist Atlanta the night that the missionaries all arrive, and they have a big dinner, and then they tell you who your missionary is that you're going to host. So what do we get? We get a guy named Steve from Texas. He's a computer programmer working for Wycliffe Bible translators. And I'm thinking, man, this guy's not going to have any cool stories at all to tell. I say all that. He's a great guy. We're friends to this day. But I say all that to show how little I knew of missions and missionaries, back at that time. But God used that to show me personally, and Jean as well, that God uses and can use anyone in His service and missions.
Yeah.
And just as we were learning with each step, it made me realize how little I had ever been taught about missions and what it really meant.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like Jean said, we started out doing some local missions, and we hosted the missionary, and we went to the annual missions conference where we got to meet and get to know more Faith Promise missionaries, and all that led up to us finally taking our first short-term mission trip in 2005. Then again in 2007, we went to Botswana, Africa, those 2 years. Then we went to Costa Rica in 2008. Felt no attachment. Had a great trip in 2008, but didn't feel any kind of pull at all. We did feel pull in Africa, but God closed the door, and that wasn't the right time or place for us. Mm-hmm. And then in 2009, we were invited by a coworker of mine at First Baptist Atlanta to lead a mission team here to a place called La Campa, Honduras.
And at that point, were you starting to have the feelings of, man, maybe we can do this full time, or were you still in that mindset, we're just going to take trips every few months?
We were still in the mindset, we're just going to take a trip, do a short-term mission trip annually. And the first time that we came here, we truly, we had, as Greg said, we had great experiences in Africa and in Costa Rica, but when we came here, we literally fell in love with the people. And God used that as a way as another step to keep guiding us more and more into missions. So when we left here after that first trip, we knew that we wanted to come back, and we said, we'll come back if it's God's will. And that's what we said as we were leaving the community. And we kept praying about it, and the opportunity was presented to us the following year to return.
Yeah, God opened the door for us and to come back in 2010, then again in 2011, and by that point, we were starting to think about being more involved here in Honduras. We didn't know what that meant. Basically, what we knew by 2011 is that we wanted to be here more than 1 week a year. The one short-term trip a year wasn't enough.
It's like I have 4 weeks vacation. We could do, 2 weeks here and 2 weeks later in the year. We could split it up in 4 different trips.
Yep.
So, we were having those kind of conversations about how can we get more involved.
So I did start becoming more involved in 2011. And then in 2012, we came with a team, and Jean and I each had a very personal experience where we sensed, I'd say we heard, we didn't hear God audibly, but we just sensed in our spirit that he had much more for us here. We were in 2 different places in Honduras. I was working with construction. We were doing a church plant, and Jean was working with children's ministry in a church in another community. But we both very clearly sensed that God was opening that door for us to come here permanently.
Yeah. So, and then what was it? Then another couple of years. So it was a few years before you really kind of moved here, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You moved here in what year?
Well, we moved in 2015.
Okay.
But we kept coming on short-term mission trips. But in 2013, we actually bought property and started building a home.
Right. Which I've been to, and it's a pretty amazing house. So it took 2 or 3 years to build that house, right? Yeah. And how did it become more clear as you went forward what you were, at least initially, supposed to do? It had to do with some church planning, I know, but how did that sort of come about where you learned that? Yeah,
that being involved in church planning started with our first short-term mission trip here to Honduras. The missionary that we were working with and the agency that he was working with was just getting started doing church planning in this area. So we that's kind of how we got started. Mm-hmm. And the Lord allowed us to be a part of several church plants in this community, or in this area, in the communities around La Campa over those first few years. So it's sort of a continuation of what we've been doing.
Yeah, and so you guys kept coming back here, right, to La Campa, at least every now and then, right? And did you start your relationship with Pastor Emilio through that time? Was that in the beginning or a little later?
It was kind of in the beginning. In 2009 and 2010, we were working in a different area, further out from La Campa with a different pastor. But then somewhere between 2010 and 2011, circumstances changed, and we had learned of Pastor Emilio and Torre Fuerte, the church that we're in here today right now.
Yeah.
And we just began building a relationship with Pastor Emilio and with people in the congregation, and God used that to kind of center us and focus us in this area where we are now.
Yeah, and Pastor Emilio is kind of who you have been focusing a lot of the church planting efforts with, right, along through the years, from what I understand.
Yeah, most of the church plants we've done with Pastor Emilio, although we worked with
Pastor Jorge up in it's a community called Caiquin, and we've done a couple of church plants with his church as well.
Now, what's your role with the church planting? Obviously, he's kind of the local pastor who's planning the churches, but what would your role be in the church plant sort of process?
Typically, what we've been blessed to be able to do is really go in with Pastor Emilio and or with leaders in his ministry, identify communities where there was no evangelical church, and then we went in with local church leaders and short-term mission teams, and we literally just began plowing the ground. We went door to door visiting families, praying and sharing the gospel, and looking for the person or the family in that particular community that could potentially be church leaders. And then that process continued, but it's always been a partnership with us and Pastor Emilio and his church leadership to do the evangelism, do the outreach. Short-term teams are tremendously important in that process.
Yes, because it's the getting into the communities and getting to know the people, just earning their trust and building relationships and finding out what their real needs are.
Mm-hmm. And at what point in that did you guys start getting involved in coffee?
The coffee started in 2011.
Okay.
My job situation changed in 2011, and we weren't exactly sure what direction I was going to go. God was working a lot of different circumstances out in my life and in our life together, obviously. So as we were working through, okay, there's economic needs. You're supposed to have a job. I mean, that's what you do. But at the same time, there's this pull to Honduras to get more involved in Honduras and to spend more time here. And coffee ended up being that step or that bridge. In 2011, we started a very small coffee importing business called Abundant Life Coffee, and we began sourcing coffee from a co-op of growers in the communities where we had started planting churches as a way to benefit those growers economically. So that was how the coffee got started.
That's kind of how we ended up meeting, because I used to work for Phoenix Roasters, in which I talked about on this podcast a lot, and you started a relationship with Brian, at least Greg, initially probably Greg, I think.
It was really kind of both, and it's kind of a neat thing. It's sort of a little bit of a full circle thing. So our Sunday school teachers, for our first Sunday school class ever, First Baptist Atlanta, where we got involved in missions, they were at some sort of event up in Lawrenceville or Suwanee, I don't remember exactly where up there, but it was an event that Phoenix was at, and Brian was there. So our Sunday school teachers that got us involved in missions in the first place went up and talked to Brian and said, we've got some friends that are doing some stuff in Honduras, a ministry and coffee, you need to talk to them. And that's how I got Brian's phone number, and that's how we got started.
Yeah. And then a couple people from Phoenix came to visit you guys and started that relationship, and that's one of the coffees, at least in the beginning, that was one of the three main coffees that Phoenix had. After Panama was Guatemala, and then you guys, with the co-op, which I think is really cool. But I want to transition just a little bit, because I think all that stuff is interesting. You're kind of seeing a pattern of, okay, this is what's next, right? What's next, and let's kind of figure this out. Whatever's next, we don't really know. But now you have sort of this other aspect of your ministry where you guys are doing something called the Reuben House. So just kind of talk about how you saw a need, and then it led to this whole other ministry that, again, you probably, even coming to Honduras, you wouldn't have thought, oh, we're going to do this amazing Reuben House, right? So how did a need kind of open that door?
Well, I want to preface that with a comment that a pastor friend of ours made, and we were talking about us coming here, and he said, he and Greg were talking, and Greg mentioned something about there are like 24 communities in the La Campa area, and he says, oh, so you're going to, so we've got a plan for 24 years for you to do church plants if you are able to plant a church in each one of those communities. So we kind of laughed about that. So that's back in like 2011-12 when that comment was made. After we had been here for a couple of years, and as we've already said, short-term mission trips is very supportive of the ministry here. So we had a team coming in, and one of the types of ministry that we do with short-term teams is medical brigades, and we were doing a medical brigade in one of the mountain communities. But prior to that, we had also been doing some outreach in surrounding areas, and we would meet people that had some physical needs, some physical disabilities. Some of them may have been like a broken leg or a fractured ankle, and they were not receiving the help or treatment that they needed. And one gentleman that we met with a broken leg, he was told he'd wear the cast 3 months, and if you're not able to get back to my office to get it removed, here's how you take your cast off. So all of these things I'm sharing because we never know what it is that God is going to use to get us to where it is that He wants us to be. So all of that had been in part of our lives, And then we have this medical brigade in a mountain community called Mescalillo.
Yeah, it was March 2017. We were in Mescalillo. This is a community where we had been working towards a church plant, and this team came here to help us start the construction and also to do a medical clinic. So it was towards the end of the medical clinic, and the family that was hosting us to do the medical clinic on their property, she came to me and she said, I'd like you guys to go up the hill and meet my neighbor. He needs some help, but he can't come down here. Would you guys go up there and see him? And she didn't really tell us much of what was going on with him. So I talked to the nurse that was with us and one of our interpreters, and we said, yeah, let's go. We packed up a duffel bag full of just kind of a random sampling of all the things that we had. And we made a short hike up the hill, and that was when we met Reuben. Reuben was a young man, about 20 years old, and we learned that he had been shot and left for dead on the side of a road. And as a result of that, he was paralyzed basically from the chest down. That had happened about 6 months. It was in October 2016, so it happened about 6 months before we met him. And his condition was already pretty bad, just with the lack of care and all that people have to deal with in the remote mountain communities here. So we were overwhelmed, quite frankly, and we didn't know what to do. So we just made the commitment to continue to keep going back to visit Reuben and just to check up on him, see how he's doing, and let God work and see how God led. So we continued to do that for the rest of 2017 and into early 2018. Mm-hmm. There was a situation, a very serious situation. He suffers from infections suffered from infections of all kinds, mostly urinary tract infections, but also various infections from the skin ulcers that he had that were very advanced. And then there was an incident in 2018 where we walked out, and the doctor that went with us, she started crying, and she said, I don't expect to see Reuben alive again.
And from there, she started making phone calls back to some doctor friends of hers in Gracias, which is about an hour-ish away from his community, and was able to reach a doctor friend of hers that said he would treat him. And she gave the family instructions on what to do and how to get him to the hospital, and he was hospitalized, and he was a surgeon, the doctor that she contacted, so he was able to clean the wounds and was treating him for all the infections.
So that incident really got our attention. We've been watching Reuben get gradually worse, but that situation really got our attention, and we had that moment where we kind of felt like God was saying, okay, what are you going to do about it? He's here, you're here. I've gone to all this trouble to get you guys all the way from where you were all the way to here. Okay, so what are you going to do about it? And we still weren't sure, but we had that aha moment not too long after that around the kitchen table at our house where we finally figured it out. And the answer was, we need a place in Gracias where Reuben and others like Reuben can come from the mountain communities. They can stay there. They can receive the care that they need, and we can give them, provide access to the rehabilitation, physical and occupational therapy that they need to heal, to gain the maximum amount of mobility and independence possible. And that was the moment where we knew that it was time to open the La Casa de Reuben, or the Reuben House.
Yeah, and so you started looking for property and found a house. And then you began by renting that house, right?
We did. We found a place. It was December 2018, and our director at the time, she was sending us pictures of this particular house, and it looked really good, but we couldn't commit to the lease while we were still in the States, and fortunately, the family that was wanting to rent the house, they agreed to wait until we came back in January of 2019 so we could physically see the house. And I think I'll say this, I'll let Jean tell her part. The minute that I walked through the gate of this property, I knew immediately that this is where the Reuben house was going to be.
I was very impressed with the search that our director had done and had found this piece of property. It is absolutely beautiful. It's the most peaceful environment. But when I walked through the gate, I heard a little, okay, wait a minute. So she and Greg were talking about the property and how beautiful it is, and it was like, this is it.
All the things we were going to do.
And and it's like, this is it. It's like, we have to wait until we know for sure that this is it. We've been praying about this, and I can't say for sure that I have heard this is it.
But one of the things that we've learned since even before, as we were transitioning into missions ministry, God's plan has always been for us to be unified in this ministry.
Oh, sure.
Absolutely.
Okay. She has the same Holy Spirit living in her heart that I have living in my heart. So he's not going to tell one of us one thing and the other of us the other thing. So yeah, he made it clear to both of us that was the place.
Yeah.
So we pushed ahead. We signed a lease. We had money to make the first rent payment when we signed the lease, but we had no idea where the next rent payment was coming from.
Well, we did, but we didn't know how he was going to do it. It's like, Lord, we truly did all come to the agreement that yes, this is the place. We did look at a couple of other properties because that's what I thought we were supposed to do, and they were very accommodating. But I think that's what I had to experience to be unified in the commitment to do this.
Yeah.
So we did reach that agreement and commitment to do that, but God knew what had to happen, and He just it's a step-by-step process in everything that we have done. He takes us in small steps, and sometimes it's much bigger steps, but it's a step-by-step process, and it's just a trust and faith in Him that gets us through it.
Well, and when you're doing something where you're stepping out in faith, that unity, especially as a married couple, is necessary. I mean, you guys have been on the field long enough, and I was on the field, and my wife Becca and I definitely had unity. Like, we both would hear, like, okay, this is what we're supposed to do, and so it's kind of doesn't make it super easy, but it makes it easier to step out in faith when you're both like, okay, I heard that too, let's do this. But then we were also on the field where there are a lot of missionaries, and not all, like some of the missionaries, the wives just followed her husband there. And so they didn't have that sort of unity, and you could really see the difference. You could see there wasn't as much joy, right? Because she just kind of felt like, well, I'm just here.
I'm just here to support him.
She didn't feel called to in the same sense, and always would make me sad, because I'm like, this is awesome that we both feel called. Like, this is really amazing. Yeah. And so let's get back into the Reuben house. So Reuben was the first young man, the first person that you guys had there, and you said his state was really bad. He was paralyzed from the neck down, and very thin, and all that sort of stuff that you were telling me about before. And so you begin with him, but then other people come along, right?
Yeah, Reuben, we signed the lease and made the first rent payment in like February or March of 2019, and then Reuben came in April 2019. That was the official opening of the Reuben house. And just a couple of months after Reuben came to the house, a pastor who is on our board of directors here in Honduras, and a leader from their church came to the house just to check up on us and visit and see how things were going. And we were talking, and this gentleman says, I worked for an NGO years ago, and there was this young girl. She lived in a community somewhere around Kaikeen, and he said, you guys need to go find her. She's a candidate to come here to the Reuben house. And we looked at each other, and I was thinking, we don't know what we're doing. I mean, we're just trying to figure this whole thing out right now, and you're telling us, and you're telling us we got to bring somebody else in here. You're crazy. But we tucked it away, and then a couple 3 months later, after we got our our feet back underneath us, we said, you know what, we got to go find Rosalina.
Yeah.
So I went with Pastor Jorge, who's another pastor we work with in Kaikin that we mentioned earlier, and he and I went on a search for Rosalina, and we found her, and we spent some time talking with her and getting to know her a little bit and explaining a little bit about the Reuben House. Not making any commitment, but we told her about it, and we said, we do think you're a candidate to come to the Reuben House, but we're just not ready yet. We didn't have enough bedrooms yet, and those things. So just pray, be patient, pray, and we'll stay in touch. And then December 2019, we were in the States, and she called, and she was in the hospital again. She had that was her third time in a year, yeah, that she had been in the hospital with respiratory infections, and because of her condition, her genetic condition and arthritis, her body and posture was drawing inward and drawing kind of this and drawing down, so she couldn't breathe well just because of that. So she's very susceptible to those to respiratory infections, and the last thing that she really said before we said goodbye was, when am I going to get to be in the Reuben House? And so kind of said, well, I'm not exactly sure kind of thing, but hung up, and Gina and I talked, and like, well, we obviously have to get Rosalina to the Reuben House.
So it was actually February 2020 when Rosalina joined us at the Reuben House. And she began her therapy then. And as Greg has said, she was very drawn. She had virtually very little mobility. She could not stretch. She was basically immobile.
In constant pain.
And yes, from the arthritis. But anyway, she was able to come and she started therapy. And when she first came to the house, she was in a condition very drawn over, and she actually had to hold her plate on her knee to feed herself. And that has changed considerably with the therapy and with God's help.
So let's talk, kind of close the loop a little bit on these two. I know there are other people that you have there at the house, but we've got Reuben and Rosalina. Reuben was completely paralyzed, like he didn't move anything, but I saw him move. And you talk about Rosalina, how she was very hunched over and couldn't stretch, but I saw her do all kinds of stuff. So talk about the change that you've seen over time in these, at least two individuals. I know there's more that we could talk about.
Yeah. So yeah, when Reuben came to us, he could move his arms some.
Oh, okay.
Okay, not much. He was paralyzed, roughly chest, give or take, roughly chest down. So he could move his arms a little bit, but he couldn't hold his head up. He couldn't sit in a wheelchair without a seatbelt. He couldn't feed himself. He couldn't brush his teeth. He could do nothing for himself. So fast forward, after lots of physical therapy and an exercise program and a nutrition program that we have at the house, and with the help of a hand specialist and developing some splints and some bands, Reuben feeds himself now. He brushes his teeth. He sits upright in his wheelchair without a seatbelt. He actually has control of his torso, so he can actually move himself around in the wheelchair, reposition himself when he needs to, and he can sit. Yeah, he can push himself around in the wheelchair. Mm-hmm. As he says, it's slow, but I can do it. He can sit on the edge of a bed and balance without anybody holding him up.
Okay.
So God has done some incredible things physically with Reuben, and
and another step beyond that, he's making stuff. Like he's being productive in a sense. Like we bought some of his kind of artwork, whatever you would call it. So talk about how he's doing a little bit of that.
Well, this started about 3 years ago. There's a young man in Gracias who is an electrician and has done some work for us, and he is also a teacher at the we'll call it the local trade school. Very, very intelligent young man. And he came to the Reuben house one day and to do some work, and he met Reuben, and he he just had a draw to him and asked Greg if he could come back and visit more with him. So he actually made a very rudimentary CNC machine and was going to teach Reuben how to use it. So with everything that was taking place just through life with all of us, we kept talking about, wouldn't it just be great if we could get a CNC router for him? And really 3 years later, one was donated to Reuben.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that came through another missionary contact of ours here in Honduras. So Reuben has, again, with the help of the hand therapist and the splints and the bands and all of that, using stylus, Reuben can now enter information on a laptop, and then he can turn the stylus, and with a touchscreen laptop, he can do design work. So he's been learning how to do design work on the computer, and the computer is connected to the CNC router, which is doing engraving, wood engraving.
Yeah.
Like you said, you saw some of his products, and he's only been doing this for a few months.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
And
That's
he's doing
new.
extremely
So it's
well.
that new.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
And that was one of the things. We don't have a background in physical disability. We had no idea that we were going to be
Anything
involved
medical.
in any of this when God sent us here. But that's one of the things we learned pretty quickly is the lack of hope, the lack of a sense of self-worth, the lack of dignity that many people with physical disabilities suffer, because a young man like Reuben, he was working construction, working in the fields. He was a strong young man, and he worked physically like most of the young men do here, and he lost all of that. So that's when we began the process of thinking we've got to find something for him to do, not just to be busy, but
Sure.
to have a sense of worth. But all the therapy and all the recovery had to happen before he was ready for that.
Very good.
So that's kind of the 3 years. And just another way that God works, we were just talking about Reuben and the Reuben House and this idea of him being able to do this kind of work, and someone donated a touchscreen laptop for him.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and then Rosalina, I from the first time I met her, I knew that she knew how to sew. And she has these tiny little hands and tiny little fingers, and if you just looked at them without her doing anything, you wouldn't think that she could do much with them. But Rosalina knows how to sew, so she already had that skill and that ability when she came to us.
It's actually punch embroidery.
Yeah, okay, I don't know. The
It's
difference.
It's hand work, not a machine. When I think of sewing, I think of a machine.
Yeah.
But it's
I
all
see.
it's all hand
I
work.
see. Yeah.
So she had, even as bad as a condition as she was in, she had the ability to do that. But when Rosalina came to us, literally, we took her to her first, she sat in some sort of a chair or she laid in her bed, okay? But her body had become so stiff that her body position was basically the position of sitting in a chair. So her knees didn't bend, her hips barely moved, and her shoulders and her arms barely moved. They laid her down on the therapy table with her arms up like this, and they started trying to push her arms apart, and they went about this far. That was all the range of motion that she had. And now, now we pull up to the rehabilitation center. She's in the back seat of the van, stretching and moving everything around, getting ready for all of her all of
For
her
therapy.
therapy.
Impressive, and she's holding her head up a lot more. And,
Yes.
but she also does stuff with beads, which is also very kind of intricate work.
Right.
And so my daughters really love those kind of bracelets. So talk about where you're going with the Reuben House. So, but you're not stopping with the church planting. It's not like you stop church planting necessarily, right?
No, we're working on a church plant right now with Pastor Jorge, as a matter of fact. So we do have a church plant underway right now, along with everything else. So the Reuben House, you mentioned that our ministry started out renting the Reuben House. The Lord blessed us with the ability to raise funds to buy the Reuben House. So the ministry owns the Reuben House, so no more rent payments. And as part of that campaign, we were able to launch a large construction project to expand our capabilities to offer care to people with physical disabilities. So we're nearing completion of of that project. That will allow us to relocate the kitchen and dining area out of the existing home to here. Also have laundry facility adequate for the needs. And then we have this very large common area that we felt like the Lord led us to build. And a small part of this common area will be the dining area. We'll set tables and chairs for everyone to eat, but all the rest of it is going to be where we do physical and occupational therapy. And we really feel like the Lord is leading us to become our own rehabilitation center, so that we can provide top-notch physical and occupational therapy to the people all across these mountains with physical disabilities.
Yeah. And, talking with one of the young men, Marcos, who works there, I mean, he just works there, and he has the same sort of vision. He wants more people. And there are other patients, people who are there. And so talk about what you guys have learned about missions in general, and how people listening to this or watching this, like, what kind of lesson can they take away from this? Because maybe they're not called to go to Honduras and help plant churches and do all this stuff, but we are all sent. Jesus was sent from heaven to earth, and that's the spirit that's in me. So we're all sent, right? That's the spirit that we have. So I know you talk about this with a lot of groups and people, so talk about how we can all get involved in missions in one way or the other.
Well, there are all kinds of ways to get involved. Start with your local church, because most churches are supporting some type of local ministry, but the key there is just being willing to serve and being obedient, and just praying about it and see how God is leading. And like I said, for us, it was a step-by-step process, and it started locally and it grew from there. Before we actually went on any short-term mission trip, we were very supportive of other, friends that were very involved in missions and going internationally. So we supported them. We were, part of their prayer group. We supported them financially. So prayer support, financial support, actually serving. There's so many ways to get involved. But like you said, we are all called. If we are truly a follower of Jesus Christ, we are called to do missions.
Yeah. And I would say Jean mentioned being willing and being willing and being available. I mean, those are really probably two of the biggest prerequisites, if you will, to serving in missions, is simply being willing and available to let God work in and through you in whatever way or ways He wants to. And I think we're proof that God can use anyone, and God specializes in using ordinary people. We are not extraordinary people. No. We're just doing our best to hear God's voice, to hear His call, and to obey Him as best as we understand how to do it. And our experience is those are the kind of people that God's looking for to serve Him in missions.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, because I think so many times when people think of, God wants me involved in ministry, I think people think 8 or 10 steps ahead of where God really wants them at the time. Like, just get involved where you are. Like, you have a family, you have people that you've got people at work, at school, you've got a church that's probably involved in something. It may not be your greatest passion to go serve the homeless on a Friday or whatever it might be, but that's what you got for now. And just getting that ball moving, a lot of times God will just inspire you. That's been my experience, and I've seen so many people do that, have that story, and I've had them on the podcast where they're like, all I knew was I just got involved, and then this door opened on this out of left field, quote unquote, somewhere, and what about ministry to those who have physical disabilities? Like, what has God taught you guys about kind of the need for that, not just in this country, but
but maybe especially in this country, in the context here, that just how the gospel is expressed in ministering to people with disabilities.
Yeah, it's and it's easier for us to speak to it in this context because this is where we're gaining our experience with ministering to people with physical disabilities. But in the remote mountains of Honduras, people with physical disabilities are just really ignored. I mean, even by their families, they're just pushed aside. Life in the mountains of Honduras is hard to begin with. I'm trying to eke out a living in the mountains anyway. So everybody in the family is expected to be productive and contributing. So more often than not, when something happens, like what happened to Reuben, the family doesn't have someone that can just be with Reuben, okay, because they're all trying to do everything they can to make ends meet. So the ministry opportunity is right there, and just the opportunity to sit down with somebody like a Reuben who was spending basically 20 hours a day laying in bed, looking out a 2-foot square window, mostly isolated. That's a door to share the gospel. I mean, that's an open door to share the gospel, and bring that hope first, okay? And because that's the most important hope that we have, is to be reconciled to God the Father through Jesus Christ and what He did on the cross for us. Okay, that's the great hope that we all have. So that's first and foremost. And then after that, it's that whole process of continuing to teach and to make disciples, remembering that people with physical disabilities still have the ability to contribute. They still have the ability to do something. They still have the ability to contribute in ways. So, and again, we talked kind of about that empowerment thing. The work that Reuben has now, and helping Rosalina. She knew how to sew, but Jean was instrumental in helping her with the jewelry making and the bead art and those kind of things that Rosalina has embraced and is enjoying, and now she has another product that she can offer for sale, and again, that sense of self-worth and being empowered. So
yeah, but
still, people with physical disabilities still have gifts, they have skills, and they have talents. So, and it's learning how to help them recognize that they have those gifts, spiritual gifts, and gifts and talents.
Yeah, amen. So, as we're kind of wrapping up here, how can people get involved with what you guys are doing? Like, where online? Where can they find more information about what you guys are doing? Website, something? Yeah,
we have a website. It's FHD, which stands for Family Health Development Honduras. So FHDHonduras.org is our website, and you can find more information there. You can contact us through the website. Of course, you can make donations online to support the ministry and the work that we're doing here. We are a 501c3 nonprofit ministry, so all the donations are tax deductible. We do a newsletter that we distribute mostly by email, but if anyone's interested, they can contact us through the website and
request the newsletters,
or sign up for it right there.
And you guys are always, especially now that COVID's kind of over a little bit, at least things have opened up a lot more. You guys are looking again to get more teams in. I know you've got several this summer. Yep. So is the website another good place to contact you guys and to see what kind of teams people can bring? Yeah, there's some information on our website about short-term missions and short-term mission teams, and they don't have to be big teams. The teams can be as few as 2 or 3 or 4, and we host some teams upwards of 18 to 25. Yeah. So it just depends on how what God puts in someone's heart to come here and serve. But yes, physically coming here and serving with us is an option. We're very interested in speaking to folks with physical therapy backgrounds and occupational therapy backgrounds to maybe come and join us in the work that's going on, especially as we grow at the Reuben House and we improve our capabilities to offer therapy. Yeah, awesome. Well, So everyone should go check out FHD.
FHD Honduras
FHDHonduras.org. FHDHonduras.org. And that'll be in the description here on the podcast. And if this is made into a great video, hopefully you'll just check out this number. We'll point to the number or whatever, the website will be there as well. So thank you guys so much. This has been a great trip, and I really encourage anybody to come. The food is amazing. The translators are even more amazing, and you just get to have a great time with Greg and Jean and see so many great things. God is really working here, so I appreciate it, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank
It's been
you.
a pleasure.